Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Nicholas de Wolf. I'm a co-founder of the New Media Council of the Producers Guild of America, and I'm thrilled to be here. Just got here from the airport, so if I mumble, sorry, I'm tired, deal with it. But I'm thrilled to be here for a variety of reasons, and especially this session. I'll be in this room all day, with the occasional bathroom break, if you'll permit. But this particular session is particularly close to my heart. If you'll permit me, before we begin, I'm just going to run through some of our sponsors without whom you would all be paying $500 per entry. So let's give them some props. Our promo partners are the Academy of Interactive Entertainment, Lake Washington Institute of Technology, IGDA Seattle, DigiPen Institute of Technology, Tiny Build Games, and the Indies Workshop. We thank our supporting sponsors, Her Interactive, Washington State Department of Commerce, Reward Mob, Unity Technologies, our bronze sponsors, Living Computer Museum, Sharp Business Systems. Then we're moving up to the shiny silver sponsors, Big Fish Games, the City of Bellevue, EDC Seattle King County, and VMC. And the gold sponsors are Wizards of the Coast and the City of Beautiful Redmond. And our big shiny platinum sponsors, ID at Xbox, Charles Schwab, I hope you've all done your taxes, One Redmond, and then the last but most important two, everything we do in the game industry is because of community, and that is what you'll be hearing about today. And communities are from villages, it takes a village, et cetera, and so forth, and they're all parts of networks. And the Washington Interactive Network, as you all know, is an immensely important part of the Northwest game community, and I'm immensely grateful to them for their support and production of this event. And the other entity that I'm immensely grateful to is one that I'm personally grateful to, which is Intel, who, when I helped start the New Media Council of the Producers Guild, they were the first company to recognize that new media, that games, that broadband were an equal part of the entertainment industry to film and TV, and they were the first company to step forward and sponsor us. So I'm immensely grateful to see them continuing their support of this immensely important part of the storytelling world. So all that aside, we now have this wonderful fireside chat centering on community and featuring the wonderful Bungie Studios. And I mentioned to these gents earlier, I've been a big fan of theirs. I was in Chicago when they were in Chicago. I was a big fan of Myth, Fallen Lords, and played that. So yes, I am that old. And I'm also a big fan of the gentleman here, John, yes, I'm right here, who has a wonderful game with their company, Red Hook Studios. And I was one of many, many, many who backed the Kickstarter for Dungeons. So I'm very grateful to be here on the stage and shortly jumping off the stage to listen to what I'm sure will be a wonderful chat about community. And we're going to be hearing basically from one of the larger independent game companies, and I'm sure what will, in just a few years, be also one of the larger independent game companies. And I'm sure they'll be able to share a lot of rewarding information that I hope you also will learn from. And I hope you all will have lots of questions afterwards, so I don't have to get up from my seat and I can relax. Thank you, and the stage is yours, gents.
Thank you all for being here today. When I give studio tours at Bungie, we have a mural where we have all of our games lined up. And I always admit to the people who are on the tour that my entry point into the Bungie community was right here at Halo Combat Evolved. But there are plenty of people in our community and upstairs on the development floor who can tell old hipster stories about playing all these old games on a Mac. So thank you. Thank you so much for creating some of the earliest communities and being a member of some of the earliest communities that we've enjoyed as a company. It's been an important part of our exploration from the very beginning. So my name is Dague. I'm Communications Director at Bungie. I work with our community manager as well as our Destiny player support team to make sure that we serve the player. I'm here with my colleague today, Ondraus Jenkins, who helps see to the business elements that make us a good, strong company. And I'm going to just very quickly blow through a presentation about what community means to us. This is going to be a conversation. We're going to be interested in hearing your questions as well. But before we talk about something as nebulous as community, I wanted to go on record and define what it means to us, because it means so many different things to different companies. As creators of games, our communities are the players who flock to the experiences that we create. They can share those experiences with each other. They can become citizens of the world that we create. But over the past 10 years, I think we've seen sort of a flash of every company in the world wanting a community manager to be that kid who makes us look cool on the internet. When you take a look at social media, you can see a lot of brands injecting their personality into that space. At Bungie, we find that community is a lot more tangible. If we want to be archetypal and break it down into its elements, as a community manager, you are a digital marketing professional. You talk to your customers through the digital space. And if we were to break that down even further, a community manager could be a person that manages a Twitter feed or a Facebook page. They could be a person that writes a blog or creates content like videos or hosts a live stream. They could be a person that provides customer support over the internet, answering questions or addressing player-facing issues. Forum moderation, making sure that the players of your games have a safe space where they can trade ideas or opinions about their hobby. Community managers can be spokespersons, playing the expectation game, which is a game you always lose, talking to people, engaging with the media at shows. There is damage control to be done. On your company's worst day, the community manager gets to step out front and go on the record. There is player advocacy, which is extremely important. I think every player wants to relate to their community manager as their advocate on the inside of the company. You go tell the developers what I said. Thank you for showing up on Reddit, but now go into your conference room and help them define the product so that it's closer to what I want, which is extremely important. And of course, there's event planning. The community manager could be the person that does the meetup, the pub takeover, or perhaps you're even staffing a booth at a place like E3 or PAX. At Bungie, we ask our community managers to wear all of these hats. Our community is vast, and our games are built around them. So when we bring someone on at Bungie to be a community manager, this is a multi-skilled person who can jump into any of these pools and swim in the deep end. For other companies, community management may mean different things, and any number of circles could be drawn around any of these skill sets. That doesn't make the function of that job any less important. It's just evidence to the fact that the community manager serves the company based on their specific needs. At Bungie, we see community management as being the steward of relationships. These can be relationships between the players and the developers. We've had great success hosting live streams where the players of the game can meet the people who make the game, connect to that person emotionally, understand their philosophies, to humanize that creative process. These could be relationships between players and other players. We preside over and we protect the environments on Bungie.net where players can form up into their own groups. They can build their own clans, creating a team that they can use to experience the game with. Our goal is to create friendships in our games that the players may have for the rest of our lives. And of course, a relationship between the players and themselves. This may sound weird, but I think any gamer understands the escapist element of their hobby. By day, I am David Dague, marketing and communications professional, but by night, I am a protector of humanity and a slinger of void energy. Warlock? Yes. Kick ass. Yes, Warlocks! All right. So at Bungie, as I said before, our community covers a lot of ground. We've been building these communities, to your point, sir, for decades. And we have a large audience that spreads across many different social networks. We make very strategic decisions on which of these social networks is good for which executions. They all have their own strengths, they all have their own weaknesses, and there are certain places where we just don't belong. Snapchat, for example, is an interesting example where we were basically told by Snapchat, we don't want brand channels on Snapchat. Snapchat is the Wild West. It's for the specific end user. If you would like to purchase filters, you would be welcome to do so. But in terms of having the Bungie Snapchat channel, that's not really, that doesn't really jive with what they want to accomplish as a business. We have an interconnected network of people at Bungie who whose job it is to talk to the world on behalf of the company. I have my own Twitter account. I manage, along with a couple of other people, the Bungie Twitter account, and there they are. That is the Director of Marketing, Eric Osborne, as well as Chris Shannon, aka Cosmo, who is our newest community manager. We also work with Activision to maintain a marketing channel for the game brand, as well as the Destiny player support team that has the Bungie Help Twitter account, which is where we provide bulletins and updates about the playable state of Destiny. So if you want to follow Bungie, those are all of the different voices. Those are all of the different strains of conversation that you can find on Twitter. Outside of what we say, the things that our community say is extremely important. That's the Destiny directory on Twitch. Any moment of the day, we have people who are playing our game in front of a live audience. We can go to this space, we can get a visceral, real-time response to the things that we create. We can use this for emotional reactions, we can use this for network diagnostics, we can just use this to form new relationships with the people who are playing our game. We have an endless form of currency in terms of the attention that we pay to these people. We can highlight their content, we can interview them, we can help people who have yet to discover them make relationships with these content creators. And they can reach right through that fourth wall into their audience and bring someone along on the adventure with them. It's been one of the most interesting developments in the digital space that we've seen since we launched Destiny. Then there is our own face to the world. On Bungie.net, we write a blog. We go on record once a week with a wall of text that tells people what we've been up to this week, what we're planning, the things that we're doing to change their experience, and then just giving them maybe a window into our world so they can understand our philosophies and what we're thinking about when we make games. The player also has a voice in that space. Among all of the forums where they exchange ideas about their hobby, there's also the feedback forum. This is where they tell us how the game could be better, how they perceive it to be broken, or just give us ideas for how they would imagine Destiny evolving. Every single employee at Bungie gets an email from our community manager twice a month, every other week, if you will, about what's being talked about on this forum, or on Reddit, or across Twitter. So the people whose full-time job it is to pay attention to our players and what they're saying get to inform the creative process and the way every person at Bungie thinks about the game that we make together. Our community is also very creative. They're always creating artwork, they're always expressing themselves through multimedia, and we have a place on Bungie.net where we create a museum of all of the things that they create. We socialize this on our Twitter account and our Facebook page once a day, turning our players into the rock stars, turning our players into the heroes that they are in our world. Over Christmas break, I had been away from my gig long enough to get bored, so I went into the Facebook group that I share with other community managers. And I asked them the question, what do you think are the archetypes of community management? If you were to provide a visual metaphor for what you do and the purpose that you serve, what would that be? I asked everybody to give 3 examples. These were mine. As a community manager, on your best day, you can be the front man or the front person for the circus. You are there to introduce your audience to the greatest show on earth, but you always have to bear in mind that the person that the audience will really remember is the person that gets shot out of the cannon. In this case, that could be the developer. On your worst day, you are the patient operator who works the problem. The player is the astronaut. They get to have all the fun. They get to enjoy all the glory. Your job is to keep your boots on the ground and make sure that they have fresh air to breathe when they get kicked to orbit. Every day, you're there to serve the player. Everybody wants to be Batman, but Alfred had some pretty cool moments too. So to elaborate on that, our goals are to serve the player. We provide them with information. Destiny is a game of special occasions and rituals, and we're there to let them know how their hobby will evolve month to month, week to week, day to day. We're there to support the live game. Destiny's experience that's constantly evolving. So when we do something to change their player experience, we give them the bullet points that itemize every way in which it is suddenly different. And as I said, we're there to celebrate their contributions. If you follow us on Twitter, every day you're going to get fan art reminding you as to how we see our purpose. The game is there to bring people together. And when those people do something amazing to really illustrate how much they love that experience, we show this to the rest of the world. This is how, when I go to E3, if somebody isn't an active player of Destiny, the first question I get is, man, your community is amazing. It's like, yes, ma'am. Yes, they are. And thank you for asking. Now, these are the 3 deadly sins of community management as I see them. When I hired a new community manager, when I plucked him away from the subreddit that he had created to provide a great place for the players of our games to talk to each other, these were the 3 things I said to him on his first day. We will never try to talk people into being happy. If people are upset, we can take that as an opportunity to learn about why they're upset and take those insights and give them to the team that can make that product better. We will never tell people that they don't understand video game development. Your opinion is not invalid because you don't understand how we make games. Hell, I barely understand how we make games. There are people who start explaining to me the problem, and I'm just like, it's going right over my head. And I'll tell them, okay, I need you to give me the version that I can understand so I can translate it into the version that they will understand. Our game is rated T for teen. And I have to always assume that there is a 13-year-old who is struggling with algebra, and I'm not going to talk to them about matchmaking algorithms. We will never ask people to trust us. Trust is earned. Trust is earned by providing a great experience to the player. Trust is earned by acknowledging their issues, investigating the problems that they face, and delivering a good solution. And that's what we engage in. We don't see community as an opportunity to market to people over the internet. We see community as our purpose as a company. If you ask any game developer, what is your purpose? They may say that they want to tell a great story, or they want to capture people's imaginations with a world where they can go, or any number of different things. We want to accomplish those things at Bungie too, but those are a means to an end of building worlds that inspire friendship and connecting people and bringing them together and forming friendships that will make that hobby more interesting. I saw the people in this room who are warlocks. Who are the people in this room that have a healthy friends list or a clan? So you have a team. You go to the game to see your friends, and that stops being a piece of software that you experience in a solitary fashion, and it becomes the venue where you go to experience people that you like. So that's our purpose. That's why we make games. We don't say this to invalidate anyone else's goals or to say that our goals are more important or that our games are better. We say this so that we can define what community means to us. This was a moment at PAX. We didn't have a booth that year, but we wanted to see all the cosplayers in one place. Just left of center, you can see that photographer in a crouch pose. And that's a Bungie employee taking pictures of our cosplayers. This moment was the product of 3 tweets. Everybody show up in the sculpture garden at 3 p.m., and this is what resulted. We got our cosplayers, but we also got every other person with a smartphone who wanted to be part of that moment. And this is why we make games. This is why we all come into work at Bungie every day, to create a world that will bring these people together so that they can then find each other in real life. And I think that's the best way to segue into our fireside chat. Yeah. So I'll hand it over to you, sir.
Hello. All right, hi. Again, just to do a quick reintroduction, I'm John Lindvay. I work at Red Hook Studios. I am the community manager of Darkest Dungeon, and I'll be talking to Dague and Andreas. Or OJ? Is that
OJ's fine.
OJ's cool?
Absolutely.
All right, cool. Just sort of about some of the things, we have some topics I'd like to talk about as far as like what community management is, or sort of interesting areas in particularly relating to Destiny and maybe some stuff with Darkest Dungeon. But I figured since we have this opportunity with both Dague and OJ, we could talk a little bit more about Destiny stuff, because there's a lot of cool things that happened with Destiny. So one of the first things I'd like to talk to you guys about is one of the things I found most fascinating about Destiny is that it was bringing a community of first-person shooter players to sort of a whole new game systems with MMOs and RPG systems. And those sort of, for a lot of them, it might have been like their first interactions with those systems. And I would love to sort of hear sort of what that process was like, and what are some things that you learned along the way of what that means when you either take these players who are familiar like with your sort of like the great gunplay of Bungie games and that sort of action combat stuff, and then okay, well now what's a raid? Like what does that mean? What do you mean there's a weekly lockout? It's like I don't understand.
Can you hear me? Okay, yeah, there we go. Yeah, so again, I'm Ondraus Jenkins, or OJ. Everybody calls me OJ for some reason. And in any event, so way back when we were originally designing, Jason Jones was originally designing Destiny. Like the very first principle was, if you are familiar with or love the minute-to-minute gunplay of Halo, then you're going to love Destiny. That was always table stakes for us, and so we could always bring that community, that the people who really enjoyed that sort of engagement mode together. And then we wanted to layer on all these other experiences, like the investment systems, and then all these much more kind of like higher investment experiences, like raids or strikes, and strikes being kind of the entryway to kind of understand how you would cooperate in teams of 3 to reach an objective that required 3 people to cooperate, which actually leads to some of the like foundational principles, design principles that Jason had for the game. One being that anything that's fun to do is more fun to do in front of your friends. Another one being that we wanted to create a world that actually sloped the floor. That was our mantra towards cooperation. So in any mode, you're always incented to cooperate with your friends. And so those sorts of activities like created this like kind of intentional design that kind of would create a community, hopefully, that would get people to those kind of more apex experiences that a typical first-person shooter player would never have experienced if they had never played WoW.
And I would add to that the fact that I came to Destiny, I came to Bungie from the Halo community. I was a leader of different Halo clans. I had a network of Halo clans. I understood the Bungie vocabulary back during that era. And as I came in to talk to the Destiny community, I relied on a lot of the same swagger and bravado that Bungie used to talk to the Halo players, and very quickly kind of got smacked down. You had mentioned that you paid a lot of attention to the subreddit. Maybe you remember some of my less exciting days, some of my Apollo 13 Ed Harris days on the subreddit. And I learned very quickly that they don't want walls of text. They don't want self-congratulatory expositions about our creative process. They want bullet points. They want quick solutions. They want acknowledgments. We were not talking to the same community. Yeah. Destiny changed the face of the Bungie community, and we needed to understand who this new gathering of players was and how they wanted to be spoken to and how they wanted us to interact with them. So there definitely was a flash rapid evolution back in 2013 when we started to really understand what we had created through the lens of the people who were playing it.
Yeah. Were there any sort of like or good tangible lessons that you might have learned or you could share now about sort of bringing those cross sections of players together, whether like the MMO players are coming like, oh wow, like I want to play this newfound MMO or RPG style game with the rating and all that, and then having them interact with the your more, I guess, traditional of your first person players, and sort of like, was there any sort of instructable moments of how you sort of were able to sort of bring everyone underneath the one tent and say, all right, we're all Destiny players now. We're not like, some of you might be here from Halo, some of you might be here from because you're like RPGs or whatever, but this is going to be our vernacular. This is going to be how we discourse. This is going to be how we want to sort of like shape things. Now talking about Destiny.
I think, when you say, how did you bring those players together? A lot of people will look at the community manager and say, how are you going to build us a community?
Yeah.
And as a community manager, you don't build community. Companies who try to headhunt a community manager and say, we want you to come in here and build us a community, need to understand that the game builds the community. I didn't decide one day that, what would be great is if we had a Destiny community full of MMO players and RPG players and first-person shooter players. That sounds great. Who wouldn't want that? The game built the community. The game brought those people together. Different players looked at Destiny and saw a world they wanted to be in. They saw action that they wanted to share, and they showed up. So even the moniker, we talked about this before the show, the moniker community manager is a misnomer. You don't manage community. You don't get to change the current of the river. You serve. You get to enable. You get to celebrate. You get to inform. But that's not management. Management is, we will all be nice and we will play the raids once a week. Any questions? That doesn't work.
Yeah.
So when all these players came together, what we needed to do was to learn who they were and how different players liked the experience. So if I go out and I say, I have news about the raid, well, what about the Crucible? It's like, not today. I have news about the Crucible. I have news that will impact the competitive multiplayer space. Well, what about the raid? It's like, so there are different strains of community in the Destiny community. And in the vocabulary that our content creators and our community leaders put out there, we very quickly identified a YouTuber like Datto, who I knew was going to help the shooter bro knuckleheads that came from the same strain as me. They're going to need some insightful professor to talk to them about elemental damage types and player mechanics for solving these raid puzzles. He comes from a World of Warcraft background. And then there's a streamer like Triple Rec who embodies the vocabulary of the competitive multiplayer space, a guy who rules the Crucible. So again, by highlighting these different personalities and by giving the people who play our game different people they can listen to in the community, deputizing these people to help you manage your community is the best way to go about that, because I cannot, with my limited vocabulary as somebody who has played Halo or Battlefield or Call of Duty or Grand Theft Auto, I've never played an MMO.
Right.
And I need to understand my limitations there and imbue the people in our community with the authority or the audience that they need to help shape that conversation. Anything you wanted to add to that?
I can add a couple of things. Yeah, from my perspective, I mean, one of the challenges that we had with Destiny was that when the game started to come together and we were all playing it in the studio, we didn't really know what we had, right? It was really hard to describe what it was. So, for example, like we consistently tried to avoid the term MMO because Destiny is not an MMO, technically, right? And so, to answer your question about like how do you bring those communities together, well, I think Deeja's exactly right. We didn't try to do that. We didn't try to put a label on Destiny other than it's an action game and it's a beautiful place that we believe you will want to be, and it's a place where you're going to have a great time with your friends. And so and in kind of the classic way, like we built the thing and people came and they kind of enjoyed it. So
you also raised a really good point about finding the different members of your community to sort of become the educators. Now that's something that I find that's like super critical for a lot of either community managers or players who are starting to get a community, or for developers, is to begin to identify who those people are and sort of how they add value, and then also how you can sort of support them, because a lot of times there's a lot of authenticity of when people inside the community that sort of are your educators. They'll say, hey, this is what's going on. Like, this is how you beat this boss, or this is, for us, it's like, these are good party combinations in Darkest Dungeon, and these are some cool synergies you might have never tried before or thought about. And I do my best to try and find those people and, hey, how can we help you? Because you're making content, or whether it's you're making cool art, fan art, or making cool, insightful videos or cool Let's Plays, like whatever. You're adding a lot of value, and you're being a model or a pillar in our community. And how can we support you? So for you, obviously, it's so much of a wider net of so many more people, active people inside of there. So how do you sort of go about that process of finding those people, supporting them, and sort of what is the support? What does that look like when you find someone like, okay, we want to like give you some stuff to help you do what you do as best as you can? Like, not so much like giving you like special access, but like, here, you do these types of videos. So how can we make your ability to make these videos easier or better?
I don't know if our approach to them is to say that we want to help you create the things that you create. I mean, they've got the tools they use to create their media. They have access to the game. One thing we could do to really upset our community is to treat the community leaders differently than any other player. Mm-hmm. We're making a game for millions of people, and it's important to remember that if I let one person who is a 1%er and who's amazing at the Crucible dominate our sandbox design, I could alienate millions of casual players like myself who like shotguns, who need to camp, who aren't awesome snipers. Destiny is a game for every type of player, and every type of player gets to feel powerful. So that aside, what I can really help them with is audience development. It's important to relate to them in the right way. I think there are a lot of marketers who want to relate to the people who create this content as influencers. Yeah, I want you to go out and sell for me. And they don't want to be seen as part of your marketing department. They want to be seen as an agnostic, individual, authentic person. Content creator is the term that a lot of them prefer. I like to say community leader because that does kind of remind them, you have a large audience, let's use it responsibly. But somewhere in there is, I think, the right attitude towards these types of personas. I don't expect you to influence people, but your voice is an important component of the conversation. And while they may have an audience that is hundreds of thousands, I wield a very dangerous megaphone that is connected to millions. So if I just sort of come over and say, hey, that video you made about the raid was really good, I think everyone would like to, like, where can they find your channel?
Hey, it's right.
Yeah, and so once a week we go out and we interview a different member of our community. We put them up on our blog. We link that interview out. Community focus, we call it. This is the focus of the conversation this week, is this person who takes people to play the most difficult activities, or who's just a joker who you can laugh with while they're playing the game, or somebody who creates amazing art, or somebody who creates amazing replica weapons. We call this nation building. We take a look at this as the currency that we have in endless supply. All day long, I could just say, look at this person, look at this person, look at that person. And they call that the Bungie effect in the community. My channel blew up the day Bungie interviewed me, or they, refer to it as sort of like an attaboy. Like, we like what you do. You're officially sanctioned. Everybody should go check out this person's channel. And it's the easiest thing in the world to do, is just to, you're introducing the masses to one person that has an interesting contribution to make. Yeah. We obviously, there are moments where we invite them to the studio and we let them play the stuff. And that's equally valuable because we can get an early warning system as to how we think the community will respond to this based on their early emotional reactions. And we're also equipping them with the information that they can use to lead the conversation at the outset. But we impose no standards of, you will say something nice. We impose no standards of, you're allowed to make one joke or anything like that. It's just, here's the game, man.
If I could hop in on something you just said, specifically about giving them the tools to sort of help shape the conversation, I feel like that's something that I try to do a lot with Darkest Dungeon. I think is, again, another really valuable thing for all communities is knowing the people who are critical of your game, but are able to sort of speak it intelligently and also in a balanced way where they're saying the right things and not necessarily a toxic or inflammatory way. And so whether it's inviting people in to give them that early access, or at least just showing them and giving them the extra information when they reach out to you, saying, oh, hey, whether it be a Reddit post, hey, we really want to know how you're crunching these numbers. It's not immediately obvious. Could you guys mind? And if it's the right person, you can respond to them and be like, hey, this is what's going on. Because typically, if they're the right person in your community, they'll be a little bit more responsible with how they're going to sort of disseminate that information out for you. Obviously, you yourself can get there and do a giant blog post, okay, this is how everything works, everybody. But a lot of times you won't, at least for me, you don't get as much traction as if it was someone who is one of those people who is that guy in the community who's going to go through and data mine and figure it all out and then make the guide.
Again, back to the presentation, be Alfred, don't try to be Batman. I am not Batman. I cannot rule this community from a position of strength. I can rule from behind, and I can push other people out to the forefront and say, this person gets it, this person gets it, this person's amazing. And that creates an ecosystem where there are people who have their own places, and they create their own special spaces where people can go and feel like they're part of something that's bigger than themselves, but smaller than the entire community. How can one player find identity among 30 million players? They can be part of a clan on Bungie.net. They can be part of a subscriber base for a Twitch streamer that takes them on the missions with them. They can be part of their own private group. They can have their own website where people appreciate art. And segmenting your community in that way, helping people find where they belong, whether it's Raid Sherpas on Reddit or the Crucible Playbook, or wherever they can find people who are talking about the game using the same exact vocabulary as themselves. That's when they find their home. Some people never leave Bungie.net. Some people want to live, in the big city, and they want to walk the streets with all the other millions of faces, and that's awesome. But we're also always, as Andreas said, trying to slope the floor that will lead them to a smaller group of people where they can have identity and feel like their specific desires are being catered to.
Oh, that's good. Well, I'll say a couple of things. Yeah, I mean, so we didn't talk about this, but like I've been at Bungie for 9 years. I joined right after we spun out of Microsoft, so that was Halo 3, and we were shipping or in development on ODST and Reach. And one of the things that attracted me to the company was, well, first of all, I've been a fan of Bungie games since, actually as long as you, frankly. So just to date myself. I've indeed. But in any event, but one of the things that attracted me to the company was this really authentic engagement with the fans and their community, and I think that's been true from day one. And that sort of authenticity is extremely hard, and that trust is extremely hard to build, and very easy to lose. And so when I hear Deej talk about making sure that people have the right tools, but we're not trying to guide their message, and we're not trying to kind of create influencers that we're manipulating behind the scenes, that's actually really critically important to our culture. One of the things that we started talking a lot about internally is that we build worlds that we hope inspire friendships, and that's the thing that we try to do whenever we sit down and think about, well, what's the next iteration of Destiny looks like? What's the next thing that we're going to be doing in what's our next world going to look like, if there is such a thing? Not that I'm in breaking news here. So in any event, I forget the specific question you're asking, but I wanted to make the point that that sort of authentic connection with our community could not be more critical. Anyway, there we go.
And when people are giving us criticism, that's crucial. Yeah. You don't have to be nice to us all the time. Part of that relationship is tell us how the game can be better. But at the same time, we are identifying people that can lead the community by example. So if somebody's very good at saying, I feel like Destiny could be better in these ways, that's a good conversation. If the conversation turns hostile, if the conversation borders on harassment or toxicity, that's when we would tend to back off and say, you're welcome to play the game. We're not going to publicly oppose you, but I want our players to be paying attention to people who maintain an air of respect, because that's what we hope our community is. That's why our game is designed in such a way, so that you don't get to just walk up to somebody in a social space and talk to them right away. They have to opt into that communication. Anybody who's played a social game where you can hear other players understands why we have done this. We like Destiny to be a safe environment. You come in contact with other people, but your level of engagement with those people is up to you. Short of a wave or some emote, the communication is something that you have to welcomely accept into your experience.
Yeah, actually, that brings me to something I really wanted to ask you guys about, and it ties in with sort of like finding the different pockets of your community, is that in Destiny itself, it is a very, you're getting on fire teams, you're going on strikes and for raids. Now, with the strikes, you can just matchmake and get some people and go, but then with the larger ones, you need to form up and with a squad and then go in yourselves. And then also, but inside the game, there is sort of no tool to sort of really where you can put yourself in a queue, hey, I'm looking to go do this for this raid, if you're looking for a sixth or whatever. Now, obviously, that was has to be a conscious decision, because otherwise it would be there if it wasn't. What is part of me thinks that sometimes when you are purposely pushing some of those interactions to happen outside of the game is a way of sort of giving communities an avenue or a method to sort of form around that. For instance, with raiding, with Destiny, you have the looking for group subreddit, where people are specifically that's where people go to matchmake or to find parties to do the larger, more intense things. So I think that's a really valuable thing. For instance, for Darkest Dungeon, something that people constantly ask for is for a bestiary, right? They want to know what all the monsters do. They want to have that information built into the game. And we could do that. It would take time. We could punch it all in there. But there's this really cool thing that happens that we don't do it, is that those conversations then happen on our subreddit. They happen on the wiki. And all of a sudden now there's this whole spot for this community that would have otherwise not really existed, or would have existed within themselves. They would have just had it on their own, and that would be their own interaction. And so sometimes making these paths, normally you want to go for the path of least resistance, right? With all the games, we want players to do this, so we're going to make it the path of least resistance, to engineer it so they can just go do that thing. But sometimes when you make things a little bit more thorny or a little bit more complicated, or just introduce one or two steps in between, you can see these pockets of community that otherwise would not have formed. For instance, you mentioned the Sherpas and then looking for group raid. And so with those design decisions, was that like, obviously I don't think that was an obvious goal, but like with those things popping up, like how do you then sort of bring them into like the ecosystem?
I think a community that solves its own problems is a very valuable thing. This is present on Bungie.net, where we have volunteers that are an extension of our Destiny player support team. So we're supporting the game, we're writing articles, we're troubleshooting issues and providing information. We then have volunteers on our website, so if someone shows up and they say, hey, this is busted, does anyone know about that? A volunteer can say, they answered that question 3 months ago, there's the article, go read it and have a nice day. We badge them, we imbue them with a little bit of celebrity. In the social aspects of the game, if you're talking specifically about a raid, which is a very challenging 6-player activity, we don't matchmake that. We want the community to meet us halfway and to bring their own team. We don't believe that we can flash mob a group of people who can become the perfect fighting force. A matchmaking algorithm cannot result in a dream team. It can give you warm bodies that you can fight with or against in a competitive environment. But in terms of communicating, and I understand my role, and you can self-res, so you do that before we wipe, and I'm going to put up a bubble when things get really crazy. Those sorts of conversations are a product of these subreddits or these clans or these groups on our own website. I like to look at community management through the lens of sort of like municipal governments. When I interview community managers, I say, you just became the mayor of a town. You can make 3 phone calls. Who would you call first? And the answers that I think are the best are, I would call the police because I want security. I would call the fire department because I want first responders on our worst day. And I would talk to the infrastructure guys so that all those 2 departments have roads they can travel on. But if we're talking about the raid, think about the municipal baseball diamond. It's there. You can go play baseball. What you don't see is somebody standing around with a bat and a glove shouting into the sky, does anybody want to come play baseball? Teams show up wearing matching shirts from the bar that they all like to go to. There are leagues. They get together. There is some level of social organization on the part of the people to make that activity a quality activity. If you go to a bowling alley, there's nobody standing around with a ball saying, hey, who wants to roll with me? People show up to their activities that represent their hobbies in groups, and that's why those hobbies are successful. Now, could we do a better job of helping those groups find each other? Certainly. We can always do a better job at everything that we attempt. And these are things that people at Bungie are thinking about every day. Fortunately, we're not done making games.
Yeah. I would like to just follow up with that though a little bit. Like, as you were developing it, and you sort of knew that you weren't going to do that, right? You're going to force the community to sort of like self-regulate that and come together and form those groups. Was that a difficult thing to sell to the team or to the people working on it? Because at this point in time, like look at most games, everyone's like always matchmake. Just get bodies in there, get them to go see the content, just get them in there. They'll like Zerg it, they'll figure it out, whatever. Mm-hmm. But I mean, I honestly really appreciate the fact that you guys didn't do it. But it seems to me that it sort of like flies right or flies left of where most games and development is going, as far as just like get people into the content as quickly as possible.
Yeah, sure. I mean, and that's exactly the nature of the debate that was had. So this has been a running conversation, I would say, since the game was released, and actually like probably for a couple of years before that. And Deej really kind of course, his metaphor was spot on. I mean, the issue really was that it was believed, and may be right, maybe wrong, or maybe be somewhere in between, that the difficulty level of a raid is such that you could never randomly select 6 people from the world and be able to successfully complete it. There'd be people randomly kicked out, and there'd be people like drop, and actually maybe even intentionally turfing the experience for people. And so it's going to be a really crappy experience. And so why do that? And then so I think the point you gestured towards is that like, well, then you have these really interesting kind of like emergent behaviors in the community where you have this Sherpa phenomena happen, which is amazing, right? I mean, like,
do you mind explaining that for people who might not be familiar?
Sure. Yeah, I'll probably do a really bad job. But in any event, like the idea being, and actually, but I've benefited from it because while I consider myself a reasonably good game player, I haven't had as much time as I would have liked to, and so getting through a raid is actually really difficult for me. So you go to Reddit or you go to some other site, and you can connect with people who can actually help you get through Apex experiences, whether it's a raid or whether it's a really difficult Nightfall. If you want to get, I'm blanking on the name of that sniper rifle. Help me out. No, not Icebreaker. Black Spindle. There we go. That was wicked difficult. But in any event, a Sherpa helped me get by Black Spindle. So yeah, do you have anything you want to like comment on this point?
Well, I think you were he was around for sort of the primordial ooze of Destiny, so he can speak well to the point of how did we make the decisions that we decided to make? What were some of those debates and arguments? Like, should we just bring our community together like an atom smasher and see what happens, or should we, you said, force the community to form up into these groups? And I think we like to provoke and inspire. We like to say, here's a thing that 6 people can do, but part of the challenge is building the right people to do that thing. Nobody shows up to a convention center and says, I'm an esport athlete, give me a team and I'll go out there and I will kick ass. That just doesn't happen. And
I want to meet that guy, though.
that would be amazing. That would be. Let's pretend we're that guy. Let's just show up with a bunch of like high-end peripherals and say,
Yo, you need a 5th? Let's do it.
I'm here to compete, man.
I'm a contender.
It could have been a contender. I could have, maybe 20 years ago. But I completely lost my train of thought.
sorry.
The Sherpas, the metaphor for the Sherpa is, the person that will take you up to the mountaintop. Quite literally. You could, in this world, walk up to a base camp at the bottom of Everest and say, I want to go up there. And they'll take you. And those, those people, those Sherpas decided to do that, and they made themselves available to the world. So thank God for them, because they did complete the experience of Destiny for so many people that don't have the social wherewithal to join a clan or to raise their hand on the internet and say, I need help. I mean, what's more intimidating than that is to go to a place where you have no friends and raise your hand and admit that you can't do something. So the fact that the community solved that problem for us, that's us putting the impetus on the community and celebrating them for doing so. Back to you, Andreas.
I'm good. No, I'm good.
Settle. Okay, well, we'll do one more question, and then we'll probably open up for questions from the crowd afterwards. But the one thing I wanted to talk about, and you sort of hit on it again a little bit earlier, about how community managers aren't here to manage. I have a couple analogies that I like to think of. I did a talk at GDC where I like to sort of equate ourselves to camp counselors, or group therapy, where we're sort of like, it's not like, the expression I use is like, as a community manager, I don't go up to the mountaintop where the developers are to get the information to then bring down to the masses and say, okay, guys, this is the gospel of Darkest Dungeon. Here it is. Enjoy it. I'm going away now later. But more so, I like to think of it as we're all sitting around a table and we have developers on one side, players on the other, and it's about making sure that we all understand sort of what's going on, like why we're doing this X or Y, or then why players feel this way about this thing, and how we can sort of exchange that back and forth so we can have like a meaningful discourse to then push the game forward. And you also raised the point, I think, during the when we were talking before the show or before the panel, about how a community manager sort of like stands in front of when things go bad, the community manager is standing on the tracks watching the train come, and you sort of you're not there to stop the train. You're more so there to sort of just receive the impact and let it just sort of wash over you.
Inspect its cargo as it runs over you. Yeah.
And when it's bad, you let it go over you. And when it's great, you make sure it gets to where it needs to go, which is to the team and to the people who are actually working their butts off to make this experience available to everyone. And so I would like to sort of talk a little bit more, or just want to like sort of expand on that as an idea about like, it's not a management, it's more about like interacting and how you sort of engage with your community and then how you sort of structure that discourse. Like, are there any sort of things that you guys do with when you're, you've talked a little bit about the blog posts and then maybe highlighting people in the community, but when you're just doing your day-to-day, like interacting with the community, how do you help model the discourse so that way you're sort of getting sort of the interactions that you're looking for, or making sure that's at least productive, or, yeah.
I did this for the first couple of years after the launch of Destiny, but I was easily outdone by our new community manager. So when I passed the torch to Cosmo, I consistently refer to him as the best listener in the studio. And it's a bit of a cliche in the realm of community management to reply to a thread and say, thanks for the feedback, I'll pass that along to the developer. People like to hear that a few times, and then eventually it turns into, well, talk to me about what you're doing with it and give me a timeline for when that problem's going to get fixed. That's why our player support team gets their own module in every single weekly update. This week at Bungie is our weekly address So we address the playable state of the game. We talk about what we're working on and what we're thinking about. And that's a good opportunity for us to let people know, here's what we're doing with the feedback that you've given us. A new hotfix has been greenlit. You'll get an update in a couple of weeks. We're fixing the colorblind issue. If you're not able to play with people in your home over the same network, we're working on that. We hope to have a fix deployed soon. You need to keep the heartbeat of that conversation alive and thumping. And I told Cosmo that he had become successful when people stopped coming to my desk to ask me, what are the players talking about, and started going to his desk. So I'm heads down typing something at my desk, and over my shoulder I can hear somebody saying, hey, which strikes are their favorite? Or what should we do about this? Or what should we do about that? And he's responding to them not with, hey, make the game this way, but when I look at the community, here's what I'm hearing. And being the conduit between the people who are playing the game and the people who are making the game, and building that bridge and maintaining that bridge and deciding what traffic gets to go over that bridge is a very important function of community management. Not to tell the player you're wrong for saying that, not to tell the developer don't do that, but to say, let's help these two groups understand each other a little bit better.
Yeah, I mean, for us, like a much smaller team with Darkest Dungeon, but it's something that I find myself doing a lot, especially because we have very limited resources. We only have 2 engineers, and so when community are like, hey, we want, we'd love for this or mod this or this support, we're like, yeah, we really want that too, but finding the way to sort of make sure they understand, yes, we want those things too, but the reality is of we only have 40 hours a week for these 2 engineers, which is 80 hours, and right now we're working on this DLC, so we will get to it, but you just please bear with me. We'll get there eventually.
Well, and to quote your own words right back to you, one of our developers at Bungie went to your GDC talk and then came up to me in the kitchen and said, do you see yourself as the player's inside man? And I said, well, I see Cosmo serving that role now. That's the role of a community manager. I'm, planning the things that we say about the new things that we're working on, and we have our community manager to constantly be there to listen and to constantly be that player advocate. And when you go to something like triage, where they're deciding which features survive, which features get cut, they can always look over to the community manager and say, what would the players want us to do right now? And whether they are our player support specialists or whether whether it's our community manager at Bungie, that person has a seat at the table, so that when we are deciding what the product will be and when we're looking to define what the deliverable will be, the person who gets to be the voice of the player is actively engaged and involved in that conversation.
So one of the interesting things about a game the scale of Destiny is that you have these two groups of people. You have the designers and the people and the engineers who've actually spent hundreds of years of their lives, put it that way, building this amazing piece of software. And then the other side, you have all the players, all of our fans who've spent hundreds of hours engaging with all the content that we've created. And so you have 2 groups of people who are like, this is ours, right? and so the job of that Dague and Cosmo do, kind of mediating that conversation. Yeah, I definitely don't want that job. More power to you. But that's an incredibly challenging task to kind of walk that tightrope where people who are engaging with you day in and day out know that you hear them. You're not reacting to them, and you're not trying to, like Dague said, you're not telling them that they're wrong, right? Because this is something that they own. And on the other side, you've got guys who and women who've spent just hundreds of hours tweaking every little knob, making the experience, then crafting it exactly the way they want to. And so that's an amazing challenge. I don't know. I honestly have no idea how you do it. How are you still sane?
I never claimed to be sane.
Just be very
Yeah.
patient.
And to the point of, telling somebody, if this is how that conversation would go, well, you don't understand video game development. Well, okay, talk to me about how video game development works. Well.
Yeah. Well, so we have a time maybe for 1 or 2 questions. So I think if you want to just come up, I guess I'll walk down with the microphone and then we'll pass it around. So if anyone's interested, raise your hand or, all right, cool. Come on over. Thanks.
Yeah, so full disclosure, we do run a show and stream production for DestinyCon and GuardianCon this year. And one of the big things that caught us off guard last year was the interest in charity. You know, St. Jude's, Extra Life, all this kind of stuff, specifically in the Destiny community. So I'm curious if that was by design or just a byproduct of your community leaders, you know, pulling that into the fold, or, you know, where that kind of came from.
We have the Bungie Foundation. We are extremely fortunate to do what we do. We come into work every day and we make video games. Anybody who's ever played a video game has probably wondered what that feels like. So we consider ourselves to be extremely charmed, and we like to take our good fortune and give it back to the world. I think that is a common instinct among most good people. When I ran my own private gaming community to play Halo, we realized that we were playing war. To listen to the chatter over the headset, it was copy that, moving to intercept. You know, we're not soldiers. You know, we get to respawn when we die, and we took, you know, the money that we were raising through T-shirt sales or people buying tickets to come to a LAN party, and we were on a very small scale compared to GuardianCon, raising money for charity. We see people doing that a lot, and we won't take credit for inspiring people to do that. We love enabling that. You know, the guys who make GuardianCon happen are people that we talk to on a regular basis, you know, to give them access to, you know, the art from the game for sale, or to, you know, just sort of be, you know, helpful guides and coaches, or, you know, just say, you know, we love it, you know, and we sent Cosmo down, you know, to, you know, basically throw our lot in there and, you know, through our own personalities, try to make that event, you know, more interesting. It's just like we'll send one Spartan, but we love the application of that stuff, and it's something that, you know, we're always looking to support. Whether we give our audience to StackUp.org or Operation Supply Drop or Gaming for Others, or, you know, whomever out there is saying, through our combined influence and through our combined efforts, we will try to make the world a better place. I think it's just an expression of any community.
Yeah, you said, I answered that exactly right. I mean, we have a foundation which I think if there's one weakness to it that we would identify ourselves is that we can't spend enough time like really moving that agenda forward. And I think Deej is again exactly right. Like it's an instinct that like all good people have, and I would like to think that, you know, the company that we've built and the games that we build and the people that are attracted to play our games are kind of are of a similar mind. And so I think that's why you see that that similar instinct in the community.
Okay, cool.
So I was just wondering, so Halo was always a one-platform game. You kind of had all of your people in one console. And with Destiny, you have 4 consoles, and so, you know, Xbox One and all that. And then Destiny 2 is now going to be on PC and the other 2 consoles. What are some of like the challenges of managing, like, are there challenges to managing all the different like platforms people are playing on, or how does that
Sounds
how
easy
does
to
that
me.
work?
Yeah. Well, we'll find out. As a self-described console peasant, I'm in for some chop. But we have a community manager who plays PC games on a regular basis. We have player support specialists who are currently, you know, investigating all of the ways in which PC gamers will operate. It was interesting when we launched Destiny, and for the first time, we were talking to PlayStation gamers and Xbox gamers. You know, combine that with platform exclusives, and the conversation gets interesting. I think the goal is to talk to the entire community with mutual respect, to provide them all with the information they need, and to treat every player like you're grateful for their business. In terms of how specifically you go about doing that, that's going to vary from game to game. The Destiny community was very different than the Halo Reach community. The Destiny 2 community will be vastly different from the Destiny 1 community, if we were to call it that. So I think you just need to keep your eyes up, and you need to keep listening, and you need to keep identifying what the community's immediate needs are. I am a very different person speaking to the Destiny community today than I was September 8th, 2014. So if you remain flexible enough to change the way you operate based on the needs of the people who are playing your game, you'll be successful.
Might be the last question.
Okay, so you mentioned a couple of sort of brute force methods to get people to directly interact with each other in a meaningful way. Do you have any sort of soft, nuanced methodology to getting people to play nicely together? If your community isn't self-generating, is there any way that you can encourage that without being obnoxious?
Actually, I would like to hop in with that because I think one interesting about specifically the mechanics of Destiny was when you use a super and the orb drop of how you reward your teammates by you using your own superpower, and so it forces, like, I think that's sort of a soft methodology of what you're talking about, of how that's forcing people to work together, because like, okay, if you pop yours thing now, then mine will be ready for the next one, and then I can do this. And I think just inherently in the mechanics of that game is sort of giving a soft push to, hey, work together, because when you work together, everyone's going to do better, because now all of a sudden the ultras are all flying all over the place and people are having a little bit of a better time. At least in the minute to minute. Now, I think maybe your question might be more so for like the higher level of like longer forming of like fire teams and things like that. Is that accurate? So I don't know necessarily about that, but I think when you can do things on the minute to minute on that micro scale, I think that stuff will then eventually sort of balloon out to the macro scale.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, so because your question really, to my ears, is a design question, and you're going exactly the direction I was planning on going, which is like there's a series of systems like the orbs, like the RXP system, loot drops. All of those things are designed to provide some sort of enhanced experience for cooperating, and then there's some experiences that you can't even get into unless you are in a larger team. And like, but one of the experiences that I come back to is like there's a mode called Prison of Elders in Destiny that like I couldn't find anybody for whatever reason to fire team up and get through it with, and so I LFG'd it twice, and got through the end. And actually, everybody who I LFG'd with, is still on my friends list, and they don't know I'm a Bungie employee, but they like help me get through it. We raid and we do stuff like that from time to time, and so that those kind of soft systems kind of led to kind of the more like I guess brute forcey kind of systems, which led to actually real friendships in my experience at least.
And I don't claim to be a game designer, so I don't try to talk about game design theory unless I just sort of allude to the fact that, like voice chat and things like that. From a community management perspective, our goals are to make players aware of each other and to make them appreciate each other. And there are moments in the Bungie community where we have done art contests. Show us your art. I had a sparrow racing film festival. Make an interesting film about sparrow racing. People become aware of each other's content. If I tweet out, in terms of engagement for tweets, I can tweet out information about the game. I can tweet out a piece of concept art that one of our people created. Any of my tweets where I ask people a question about their own character is going to be the one that is the most rampant. Show me your Guardian. Show me your newest piece of armor. If you ran the raid this week, what did you get? And when you ask players questions about themselves, that is an invitation. It is a soft skill method of saying, express yourself creatively about the hobby you love, and then people can go through and they can look at all the responses to that tweet, and they can see what everyone else is saying, and then I see them talking amongst themselves. Or I take one person who did a good job of expressing themselves, and I quote, tweet, reply to them, bump them to the top of the conversation, and you start to create the sensibility where they're curious about each other. I played video games my whole life. I know that's a cliche. Everyone who works in this industry says, I was born with a controller in my hand, but I was. And it was an Atari controller. But Bungie was the first company that ever inspired me to be curious about the people who make the game. And they were also the first company to ever make me curious about who else plays the game. And I think when the developer says, check out what this person did, that helps people make those connections. I too love the game for that reason, and maybe they start talking to each other. And that's, I think, where you get that spark and that catalyst for what community really is, which is players having an experience with each other independent of anything that you've created or anything that you've done, something that's self-perpetuating.
Thank you for the question. Thank you to all the people who asked questions.
So, I want to thank these gentlemen very much, and I hope you'll join me in thanking them for their time. I've worked in the film, TV, theatre, and game industry for far too long. But there's a distinct difference, and there's something that the film industry is learning finally. It's opening its ears, it's listening to the game industry, which is there's some words that have been used: transparency, authenticity, service. The film industry has become more an industry than a storytelling medium. The game industry has always been a storytelling medium because the players have always insisted on being part of the story. You have never lent back. You have always been leaning forward and always driving forward the game and demanding of developers and character developers and storytellers to keep upping their game, if you'll forgive the pun. And you've heard that reflected here, I think, in spades. And I thank you very much, gentlemen, for reinforcing something that makes me love this industry very much, because I don't think it'll ever succumb to being an industry. You'll see some AAAs start to make noises about certain things and drive certain storylines and sometimes get a little aggressive about them. But they won't succeed without your participation and without you helping them understand where they need to put their efforts, because they might be a smaller developer like Red Hook who only has the 2 engineers, and they can't be all things and do all things, and so they need that feedback to know where to put their limited resources. They might grow to have the luxury of many, many types of specialists like you've mentioned, but even then the community has grown to 30 million. They will never be able to be all things and do all things. So it's immensely important, this notion of community. It's the only way that games can become as exciting as they often do, and realize new iterations that will keep you engaged. That engagement that one hopes from you is driven by you, and that is what makes a community, whether it is online, on a PC, on a console, or in real life. It is a mutual engagement and a mutual service, and for that, I hope you don't mind me speaking on behalf. We thank the developers and the players. Thank you, and I hope you'll come back after lunch. It's lunchtime now.